Well, thank you for having me. So quickly, I'm Honman. I'm an engineer by training. I spent the first 15 years with Motorola, Nokia, Microsoft, and I became uncomfortable staying in the comfort zone. So I decided to do something that I can make an impact by helping Asia family-owned business transform. I happened to join a large family business that owns assets in telecom, satellite, and finance. And less than a year later, Temasek Holdings acquired it. So I spent the next 13 years with the Temasek team, growing a new business from scratch, turning around a Thai, China satellite business. And then the former Deputy Prime Minister offered me the job to be the CEO of a joint venture in the food and food safety project in China. So the key moments, getting out of my comfort zone from not wanting to be stuck in an MNC to joining family-owned business, and the other one would be accepting seemingly impossible assignments a few times, like turning around two businesses despite not having any prior experience. So what I was hoping to do is to bring those 30 years of experience to the company that I invest in, and the founders that I mentor, so that they don't have to repeat the same mistakes. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. So basically, but you spent quite a long career in large companies, and moving from that space into startups and nurturing startups is not an easy endeavor. So what made you actually make that space?
Yeah, I guess I can take the example of this company that you probably know called Turtletree that I get involved in full-time. So how it started was I started as an angel investor in Turtletree. And by the way, Turtletree is a Singapore-based biotech company that produces a new generation of nutrition using something called cell-based technology. So as I get to know the founders, Feng Ru and Max, better, I found that our personal mission and goals are aligned. And then I became particularly interested in cell-based human milk. Now, because for the first time, there is good possibility that a young Singapore-based company with a very young woman founder can provide adequate nutrition to prevent disease, promote brain development, and stop malnutrition. So this is something that can actually change the future generations of humanity. And I find that for the first time, I couldn't find anything that is more inspirational to work on. So I decided to jump in at the time where they were raising their fund, and they do need a lot of help during that journey.
So and Turtletree, it's Singapore-based, but it has a sort of a broader global reach, and you do work on cell-based milk production. Tell us a little bit more about Turtletree. What is the mission? Why is it cell-based milk production? How come the partners, the founders, decided to embark on this journey?
Well, first it started with the two founders. So the first founder is Singaporean woman entrepreneur, ex-Google, ex-Salesforce, and the other founder is Silicon Valley IT veteran. Both of them met in a Google event. And at that time, Feng Ru, the woman founder, has a passion for cheese, going around the region looking for good milk to make cheese. But along the same process, but she couldn't find a good quality milk in the region. And along the process, she also get to see with her eyes some of the problem associated with the dairy industry. So through this chance opportunity with Max in the US, they chance upon a solution to this, which is using technology to produce dairy. In other words, using cell-based technology to produce dairy without the cow. And with that, they went on putting together a business plan, talked to different partners, and they start raising funds. That was almost like 3 years ago. They first approached me but I didn't think much about it because it was sci-fi to me, and I was very focused on another sector, which is plant-based meat. But 2 years later, good friends like yourself come to me and said, Hanman, I invested a lot of money in this company. You seem to be the expert in this space. Can you help me? So as he was explaining to me, I realized, wow, this company is very business model focused. In other words, they do run into problems, which I expected, but they very quickly pivot to B2B rather than B2C. So I was concerned that when you try to disrupt the dairy industries, they are huge, they are powerful, and you'll be throwing a lot of money in to fight the battle even before you have a product out. But when they start collaborating in a B2B manner, in other words, producing ingredients for these dairy companies, things are very different. So they will help them. So I'm beginning to take interest, and then that's the rest is history.
And cell-based milk. I mean, this is we're hearing a lot about alternative protein space, and it's a large spectrum of different types of initiatives, different types of approaches. Tell us a little bit more about that space. The cell-based milk, plant-based products, and tell us a little bit more about what inspires you the most in that space.
So, very good question. The two areas you mentioned, plant-based, cell-based, they all belong to a category that we now very fondly call alternative protein, because we're making protein in an alternative way. So we call it the alternative protein. So this space is not very old. It's maybe 5 to 6 years old, depending on where you look at. It first came from plant-based meat. You probably noticed some time ago, there was a company called Beyond Meat that has one of the most stellar IPO. So they caught everybody's attention, including me. And as I naturally, I get into that space, wondering what's happening, start investing on my own money into this. As I get deeper and deeper, trying to find value, staying ahead of the curve to see which one will make it, which one will not, I realized that there are bottlenecks in this industry. It's essentially taste and the pricing. With that, we start looking into longer term solution. Then the longer term solution, we find that it's a technology called cellular agriculture, which is essentially cell-based. So essentially, they are taking the cells of the animal in a very quick way, put it in an environment like a bioreactor where they have all the nutrients similar to the animal to grow cells into a piece of mincemeat or a steak even, without going through the animal. Because if you want a piece of a steak, you probably need 3 years to get the count. And then in the process, emit a lot of gas, cause a lot of environmental damages. So when we look at this space, there is the plant-based meat sector and there is the cell-based meat sector, and they are going to be here for a while.
And while I was sort of preparing myself for this discussion, I looked at some of the interviews done with the founder, Turtletree's founders, and she was saying, the reason that she started embarking on this journey, that the mozzarella that she was eating apparently did not have that sort of chewy texture, and according to her, it was the calcium deficit within the milk, and hence she decided that raising animals and using their milk and raising them with antibiotics is detrimental to the quality of the milk, which does not give the same quality of cheese. So that sort of stuck in my mind, and nowadays when I'm eating mozzarella, I look at whether it's chewy or not. Now, how much does the consumer know this? Yeah, the consumer. How much is the consumer aware of the fact that the cell-based milk space will yield not only environmental impact, but also a better quality of products? I mean, how long is it going to take for the sector to actually legitimize itself with consumers?
That is a very, very good question. So a few things. I mean, I must confess, even for myself, who 6 years ago became a farmer, run a farm twice the size of Singapore, and dairy is a big thing. I didn't know that fact. But I do know that when we talk about cheese, it will get an Italian like yourselves attention. In fact, I actually flew to a small town outside of Milan, talking to this supplier called GEA, looking at exactly mozzarella cheese making equipment, and brought them to China. And that's what my first investment in China into my food zone. Not many people know that, including myself. In fact, a lot of this is a good time to pull back to plant-based and cell-based. So there are plenty of plant-based dairy out there. So a lot of them were saying that we can take this that is plant-based dairy, plant-based milk, made from cashew nuts, made from oats or so on, and try to make cheese out of it. You cannot, because there's a lot different, there's many different components in it. The same thing goes for egg white. I'm not sure, there's another startup that actually has issues, or a lot of companies were trying to use non-animal free dairy. They couldn't use it from plant-based. And the only way they can do it that is close to this is cell-based, because it is actually similar in terms of biologically the same as the cells before. So if you use bovine derived dairy to make mozzarella cheese, to have the texture and all this, you do need something similar to that. And cell-based provides you with that without the animal.
And in terms of the full commercialization and having these products on our shelves, how long do you think that's going to take?
Okay, it's going to take a while, and they will be just like many of the industries, like the PC industries that I have it on my laptop. It takes probably a couple of decades, but for cell-based and plant-based, right now, there were a few reports out there. I think one report said that, in fact, 6 reports, BCG, A.T. Kearney, even Temasek Holdings, we were all looking at, by the end of the decade, we will have at least half, if not more than half, of all the dairy, seafood, meat will be provided by alternative proteins, plant-based or cell-based. And then, further down the road, probably more. By then, I believe the tipping point will be there. More and more alternative proteins will be in our food that you don't even talk about. Is this piece of meat grown in a farm traditional way, or is it from bioreactor? The biggest 2 bottlenecks that which investors should pay attention to is, first, how soon can the customer acceptance be mainstream? Second is regulatory approval, because after all, these are meat that people have not been eating for hundreds or thousands of years. So it takes a while. We want to make sure that when we make a product, even though scientifically is safe to eat, it needs to go through very rigorous testing, as well as consumer acceptance. So these are the actually biggest challenge. But the plus point of this whole thing is, unlike cell phones, unlike PCs that you've seen transform the industries, there is a big problem or crisis that we need to solve. There's climate change, there's environmental, and there's also, to a large extent, animal cruelty. So I think this will be much shorter than those decades to make it happen, or mainstream.
That's very true. How are the incumbents reacting to it? For example, when I look at the farming industry, especially in the United States or in Australia, or in Japan even, they're just huge milk producers, and they have millions of livestock, and there's their livelihood. Predominantly, a lot of the farmers depend on it. They do have, especially in the United States, a big constituency in terms of political representation. They literally vote with their milk. Now, how do they react to this?
Very interesting. Depending on when you ask me, when you first asked me, a lot of denial. Oh, this is a fad. Don't blame them. I think I went through several industry. PC, like I said, and cell phone, same thing. And you constantly see newcomers disrupt. So same reaction. But right now, if you look at during the past 12 months, the big boys, whether it is Tyson Food or Cargill, Nestle, they start offering products that they don't believe in the beginning. Then there are other bigger, like if you talk about the meat industries, they, instead of blocking it, what they do is actually they wait for some of these startups reach certain momentum at the right price, they make an acquisition. So we're beginning to see that happen, and more will come. In the dairy industry, we're beginning to see some of that. Why I said that is because in Turtletree, when we first started, we didn't have a value proposition. But then now we changed the value proposition. Essentially, we went to some of the big dairy providers and said, look, we have the technology that can produce the same dairy, but more efficiently without all these issues that are controversial out there, climate change. And by the way, there is carbon tax that is going to implement, and there is consumer asking for carbon footprint and so on. So we said, the price of your traditionally production of, for example, an ingredient called lactoferrin is not going to come down. Whereas our method, the more we produce, the cheaper the price go. In fact, up to a certain point, we could put a big bioreactor in your farm without you having to worry about lockdown, logistic issues, disruption, and so on. And it's consistent. So that is a good value proposition, and we're beginning to get MOUs, people asking us for samples so that they can test if that's good. We can produce in volume, and we've been talking about joint ventures at the sites that they have. So the signs are pretty encouraging.
That's great. And how about being, a Singaporean in this space? Singapore doesn't have livestock, it doesn't have big farms, it doesn't have. It's not surprising that at the end of the game, a small island and people from a small island actually look at cell-based milk. What is the reaction that you guys get when you go out into the international markets and you say, I'm from Singapore and I'm in the dairy business? What do people tell you?
Well, we are pretty good in leveraging the plus point of Singapore, the Singapore branding, right? Trustworthy and things. That's good because, especially living in China for a number of years and involved in food safety. So, but if you say that we are a company, we're trying to do food and bringing the Singapore way, and Singapore, by the way, is just behind the US in terms of the world's food safety standards. So carries a lot of credibility. So it's mainly positive to do that. I think they recognize that Singapore is always looking ahead, and we know how to use resources, but also recognize that Singapore is a small market. We come up with a product, we will have challenges to make it scale. That's where a lot of the partners that we spoke with are very keen to partner with us. We do all the de-risking in the beginning, and then they help us do the scaling.
Great. And are you also looking into the rest of the space in alternative proteins? Is there anything that catches your eye and you say, wow, this is going to be huge, this is where I would put my money into?
Yep, definitely. I think as a general rule, this applies to all the investments we get into. We look for companies that have their technology de-risk to a certain extent, so that I'm not funding them to risky technology. And then the product is ready, and then now they're raising money from us to do scaling. For long-term perspective, I'm looking for companies that are on their way to defining a new category. Well, what this means is, people like the Uber, the Airbnb, the Google, and the Salesforce in the agri-tech space. So I'm constantly looking at those startups that will have a good opportunities to become a category king in that area. Oh, there's another part of it is there are a few areas. So there's a plant-based, and there's a cell-based, but there's an area where it's currently getting a lot of attention because it solves one big pain point, which is contract manufacturing. In the cell-based industry, we call it CDMO, contract design, manufacturing, and operation, because as more and more cell-based startups start coming to place, great technology and so on, they do need a partner that could help them do the initial sampling pilot. And so this space is actually quite limited. In fact, the current capacity in doing this will last not more than maybe 18 months. And they were all from the pharmaceutical bioreactor space. So that's an area we're looking at investing. And then the other area would be ingredients that allow these cultivated product, whether it's milk or meat, to grow, like growth factor, like cell lines, meaning choose whether you're using yeast, fungi, bacteria, or pork cell lines, lamb cell lines, the ones that are actually giving the kind of yield you need in order for you to get the price down to the level you want.
So there's a whole spectrum there. For example, if you are a newcomer into the space as an investor, are there alternatives beyond private companies, some of the public companies that actually operate in the space? How would you tackle having exposure to the sector? What would you do first?
Oh, that's a question I get asked many times. I said, at the very least, start reading up and LinkedIn posts, talk to people like yourself, Sharon and Vaughn. I think the other part would be, if you're not that gung-ho into this, perhaps it's better the first investment is investing in a fund, in a reputable fund that has a mission that is aligned with you. In other words, making profit, but also purpose-driven. That makes a lot more sense.
So there's actually alternatives in terms of investment. If people are looking into the space, they can start informing and then get into the space either through private or public companies. But it's still a long way to go. I mean, when I look at public companies, some of the listed ones, they do have valuations that have skyrocketed over time, and probably they're prohibitive for a lot of the investors at the initial space. So I think my guess is that there will be a surge of new private companies being listed on public exchanges so that people have access to it, because access is relatively limited. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, right. And I'm beginning to see a lot of creative tools like setting up SPVs and slicing it smaller sizes for the individual retail investors to invest in. So if you cannot afford to buy, for example, Impossible Burger shares, they are vehicles that you can go in to join a special purpose vehicle specifically to invest in that. So the amount you go in is, but that is still a pretty risky, and I think it's good that the investors in this space get educated and choose the right partner to invest in and go along this journey. This is a long journey. This is not a one-time, hit and run. You need to have that attitude, and you also need to trust the people who hold your money and whether they're investing it with a certain purpose. Because I've seen, and I've got people coming, why did I lose money and do this? I said, this is not casino. This is not betting. It's longer term. You want to make an impact, and that you don't have to worry whether you'll get your return. You will get your return eventually, even if it's not financial. But you are actually changing the world, and it takes a long time to do that, and solving some of the big problems we have for our children.
Yeah, that's very true. But just, I think this is a nice bridge to sort of, we have roughly about 5 minutes, but I know that you're also very active in the philanthropic work, and you do activities with LEAP and elsewhere. Tell us a little bit more about this part. You actually dedicate quite a lot of your time to not only getting mentorship to companies and getting them off their feet, you dedicate time to philanthropic activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a bit personal. So for many years, I was busy with building a career, just like many of my friends, my age group. But I found that there's always something missing that I couldn't hold on. So then I realized there was a lack of purpose. And I started looking for a solution. So about 2 years ago, when the country started the lockdown due to pandemic, right? My kindergarten classmate, who comes from one of the Singapore oldest and established banks, suggested that both of us do something to help the vulnerable group in Singapore. I thought, wow, nice. In 5 days, we both raised about $2 million. Of course, he is the one who did all the working to help migrant workers who are falling sick in their dormitories, because this group is the one that was ignored. And these group, the migrant workers, are so key to Singapore development for the past 50 odd years that we ignored them. So we thought we could do something like that. And in 5 months, we launched an affordable medical insurance that covers 37 critical illnesses, personal accident, and death for just $9 a year per migrant workers. That's less than the cup of a kopi o in the coffee shop there, right?
Correct.
And in the process, we're actually on our way to make impact to the lives of 500,000 migrant workers and foreign domestic workers in Singapore. And these numbers actually will become larger if we take into consideration of each of them back home has a family, father, mother, children to feed. And that's the multiplier is about 5 times. So when we do something like that, the impact is very great. It was very satisfying because we are able to add value. We bring investment experience and the best practices to rethink the way philanthropy organization can do. We help them maximize, our partners maximize the resources and impact. And then we also went through the same rigorous financial discipline that we pick the partners with a strong track record in execution and delivery. And then we measure them, the returns by the number of lives impact. We prefer not to give handouts. And we want to work with established partners. At that time, we'll be with migrant workers, health serve, and so on. So the experience is really priceless and rewarding. Tired, yes, but very priceless and rewarding. Something that you can't get from the career.
That's wonderful. And you saying you're operating on both the innovative space, and you're operating also on philanthropic activity. So actually there's a lot of purpose in what you do, you know, I mean, making huge impact on both ends. And it's a very commendable, and it's not an easy space to be in. You have to have a lot of self-motivation, you have to have a lot of patience, and a sort of a long-winded spirit of entrepreneurship, but at the same time being very firmly grounded. What keeps you going?
What now at this stage is I get a bit addicted to the satisfaction that comes with the sense of purpose. Well, and I must say, you know, I'm starting to look at what you just mentioned. I can't possibly do 2 jobs at the same time. So I'm hoping starting this year, I can combine the 2 into one. So can I still make good investment with a sense of purpose, impact lives and things like that? That's why we are talking together, Sharon, yourself, myself, on and everybody, right? I think that is what I think it can be done. We've shown it can be done.
That's great. And do you think if anybody wants to step into this area of making impact, what is one advice that you would give them before we close?
I think it's probably good, and this is just I myself, my experience, asking myself, what do I want at this point of time? What kind of impact do I want to make? And then choose the right fun partners to go along that journey. I think ask yourself first, and then go ask the other side. If the mission is aligned, everything goes. I think the rest, the biggest mistake I have and see many of the investors is they put the returns first and then talk about purpose. I think if you put the purpose first, the return will come in. For some reason, that's something that I strongly believe in. And so far, the track record is pretty good.